As the most prolific and arguably most beloved X-Man, there isn't much fans don't know about Wolverine. The character made his debut in the pages of The Incredible Hulk and has since developed into one of the most famous fictional characters on the planet, holding down beloved stints on the X-Men, X-Force, and even as an Avenger in recent years. During this time, he's amassed an incredible box office draw, luring in viewers as the lead of Fox's old X-Men films and on dozens of animated cartoons and video games. What I'm getting at here is that Wolverine is the very definition of a known quantity. He's the X-Man everyone's familiar with, and so there's not really that much out there that could be considered a genuine surprise. Or so you would think. You see, Wolverine has been through a lot in the 40 or so years since he made his comics debut, and that means he possesses a really complex and fascinating history, both on and off the page, comprising weird potential origins, identity changes, and a cancelled movie cameo that would have sent fans wild if it had been pulled off. So, with all that said, I'm Ewan, this is What Culture Comics, and here are 10 mind-blowing facts you didn't know about Wolverine. Number 10. The character had a patch face. James Logan Howlett's alter ego has always been Wolverine, so it would be pretty weird if he had another identity that he delved into from time to time. Sure, certain Marvel heroes have donned multiple personas in the past, I'm looking at you, Hawkeye, but Wolverine is Wolverine. It's near impossible to picture him as any other hero. Except that's exactly what Marvel did when they first gave the character his own solo series. At the time, the X-Men were presumed dead, and so writer John Byrne decided to cross everyone's favourite mutie with Indiana Jones, and drop him in the new locale of Madripoor, a Casablanca-style hotbed of criminality where Logan would stay undercover as Patch, so called for the fact he wore an eyepatch. Not particularly inventive, but still, it's a class aesthetic, and seeing Wolvie in that white tux never gets old. However, Wolverine actually looking the part proved to be the death knell for Patch himself. He might have ripped off the old yellow spandex, but come on, that hair is recognizable anywhere, which was made infinitely worse by the fact Logan encountered old adversaries like the Silver Samurai, and they somehow didn't manage to recognize him. Alas, I'll always love the Patch look. It may not have been an effective disguise, but Logan joins Nick Fury and Dick Grayson as one of many fictional characters to look twice as cool with a patch than they did without one. Number 9. He was originally going to be a teenager. One of the most obvious Wolverine facts is that he's old. Like, really old. Like, really, really old. By current estimates, Logan is between 100 and 150 years old, so he's getting along. His healing factor has kept him alive all this long, and has even managed to decelerate his aging to the point where he's constantly in his physical prime. Believe it or not though, this wasn't always the plan. Most Wolverine fans will be aware of the not-so-accurate story that the character was originally going to be introduced as a mutated Wolverine cub made human by the High Evolutionary. But what they may not know is that the character was originally intended to be introduced as a teenager. Yeah, believe it or not, Wolverine co-creator Len Wein initially conceived the character as a teenage hero as opposed to the gruff adult readers are so familiar with. Given so many of Wolverine's traits are so not teenagery, it's weird to think of how the character might have developed if this idea had actually stuck. Number 8. And his claws would have been fake. Wolverine's claws have been through loads of retcons over the years, and mostly for the better. Today, most readers will know that Wolverine possessed bone claws before he entered the Weapon X program, and that he emerged from that program with an indestructible skeleton without his memories. However, that wasn't how things were originally intended, and it wasn't until 1994's infamous Fatal Attractions arc, where Magneto ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's body, that it was revealed Logan had bone claws from the start. Before that arc, it was assumed that Wolverine got his claws from whatever process gave him his indestructible skeleton. But surprisingly, even that wasn't the original plan. It was artist John Romita Sr. who decided that Wolverine's claws should be retractable. But originally, both he and Wein had thought that they would be a part of his gauntlets, which would also be made of adamantium. It wasn't until 1976's X-Men 98 where Chris Claremont would reveal that Logan's claws were actually a part of his anatomy, thus changing the character forever and making him twice as cool. Number 7. Star Trek's Spock actually defeated him. Weird crossovers and comics go together like Spider-Man and constantly running out of web fluid while swinging through New York, so they tend to happen quite a bit. There have been some great examples over the years, the Justice League Avengers crossover being a particular highlight, but every now and again, one will come along that'll leave readers flummoxed. One such crossover that left everyone scratching their heads, which sounds like an extremely dangerous activity for Wolverine, come to think of it, was the X-Men Star Trek series, which was published in 1996. The storyline saw the characters of the original series link up with Marvel's mutants after some cross-dimensional shenanigans involving Proteus. Weird concept, but just roll with it. Marvel briefly had a Paramount Comics imprint, and it did not last, but it is also kinda sorta but not really responsible for the MCU, as it was the first deal the two companies ever made together, so cool, I guess? Anyway, as with most involuntary crossovers, the two teams didn't exactly see eye to eye when they first meet. This leads to Wolverine getting into a scrap with Spock, who proceeds to hand old Knucklehead his ass on a plate, courtesy of the famous Vulcan nerve pinch. Number 6. The character was modelled on Clint Eastwood. As the paragon of coolness in the 60s and 70s, Clint Eastwood has inspired his fair share of imitators over the years. His influence hasn't just been felt on the big screen, however, but off it as well, with two of the most popular superheroes of all time having taken inspiration from his most famous roles. The Batman comics in the 80s in particular took a lot of inspiration from Eastwood when it came to depicting the Dark Knight, and while Wolverine is louder and more aggressive than the kind of roles the actor took on in his prime, that didn't stop Frank Miller from looking in his direction. With old Clint's visage in mind, it's impossible to unsee Wolverine's resemblance. Number 5. He once got married to Witchblade. Despite looking like the hairiest, smelliest mutant around, sorry, Wolvie, Logan is quite the romantic. He's had dozens of relationships since his introduction, at least 80% of which end in tragedy. And being as old as he is, there are countless other romances he's probably had that fans aren't even aware of. Of these, by far the wildest has to be the time Logan broke continuity and hooked up with Witchblade, a 90s era heroine created by the minds at Top Cow and Image Comics. Like, the only way she could possibly be more 90s would be if her comic came with a soundtrack composed by Seal. And if she was also somehow drawn by Rob Liefeld at the same time, feetless and with about a dozen ammo patches dotted around her body. You can never be too safe. Written by X-Men legend Chris Claremont, 2004's Witchblade Wolverine one-shot saw the duo get hitched in Vegas. I don't think they've ever actually gotten divorced either, so make of that what you will, even if what happens in Vegas is when to stay there. Number 4. In one universe, he was in a relationship with Hercules. And while he's been depicted as exclusively having heterosexual relationships in the main Marvel universe, it seems as though the same rule doesn't apply to every version of the character. In fact, it actually looks as though Logan and Hercules, a canonically bisexual character in the main 616 continuity, are an item in Earth 12025, as seen in the pages of Extreme X-Men, spelt with an X. In this continuity, Wolverine and Hercules were considered to be the two greatest heroes the world had ever seen, but they were forced to keep their relationship a secret, as Zeus doesn't exactly take kindly to gods who consort with mortals. They're eventually banished to the pits of Tartarus, and aren't reunited until a group of multi-dimensional X-Men recruit them to their ranks. And hey, look, all I'm saying is if main Wolverine is having a thing with both Jean and Cyclops currently, a man that old has to have batted for all teams at some point or another. Go live your best life, Wolvie. Number 3. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine nearly had a cameo in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. The idea of an interconnected universe of films isn't exactly shocking today, but back during the rise of comic blockbusters, they seemed like a pipe dream. Marvel weren't in the movie-making business, or at least they wouldn't be until 2008's Iron Man came along, while the rights to characters like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and X-Men were held by Sony and 20th Century Fox, respectively. The chances of any of them meeting were impossible, or at least that's what most believed. It turns out that we came very, very close to actually getting a crossover between two of the biggest comic book franchises of the time, X-Men and Spider-Man. As Hugh Jackman revealed to the Huffington Post in 2013, the actor very nearly wound up on the set of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man for a brief walk-on part, where he would have actually worn his costume from the first X-Men film. And the reason why he couldn't do it? It was because they couldn't get his costume to him. It's kind of amazing that it was just the costume not arriving that meant the whole thing collapsed, and not the assumed finicky wrangling over movie rights. Number 2. A cancelled storyline would have made Sabretooth Wolverine's father. If you only got your education of Wolverine from the films, you'd be forgiven for mistaking Sabretooth for being Logan's brother. While such a plot device did give us an admittedly great opening credits sequence, it was a brand new element introduced for the film. They're just old, bitter enemies in the comics. The only thing they have in common is that they're both really, really hairy and snarl a lot. That said, this wasn't always the original plan. In fact, for a while, Sabretooth was originally intended to be Wolverine's father, which had also been a long-standing theory amongst readers at the time. So, to begin with, Sabretooth was actually introduced in the pages of Iron Man and not the X-Men. It was at this time that X-Men duo Chris Claremont and John Byrne conceded the idea that the character should be linked with Wolverine. But burn left before the storyline could ever come to fruition. Claremont occasionally returned to the idea in Wolverine's spin-off comic, but the question was dodged all the way up until Larry Hama's run on the character in the early 90s, where Wolvie gets a DNA test to settle the question once and for all. So, according to Nick Fury, there's no relation. But come on, he's Nick Fury. He's not exactly the model of honesty, so let's not close the book on this one just yet. And number 1. He was once going to be Australian. Hugh Jackman's casting as Wolverine was hugely controversial at the time. The actor was primarily known for his roles in theatre, and he was also considered to be way too tall to play the character by a lot of die-hard fans. Even so, the Australian actor went on to define the character on the big screen, reprising the role a further 7 times after first appearing in 2000's X-Men film. However, one thing fans may not be aware of is that Jackman was not the first Australian to play the character. Although Wolverine has always been a Canadian in the comics and on the big screen, when it came for the X-Men to make their animated debut, the showrunners decided that he should come from a land down under. Amazingly, the reason for Wolvie being Australian was supposedly due to the popularity of Australian film characters in the 1980s. The likes of Crocodile Dundee and Mad Max meant the US had Aussie fever, and according to Rick Holberg, storyboard artist on the failed Pride of the X-Men pilot, Marvel had even planned to make Wolverine Australian in the comics, only for the planned storyline to never materialize. Crikey. And that was our list, everyone. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and to head back on over to whatculture.com/comics for all of your comics needs. I've once again been Ewan. You can catch me on Twitter writing my own Nightcrawler Wolverine fanfiction at EwanRuinsThings, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!